Hey everybody, Willie P here, and we're back for another reaction. Today we're gonna react on America's Nuclear Warriors, the Global Strike Command. This is interesting because I was part of Global Strike Command. I'm still active duty Air Force, so I'm not gonna be able to actually get into the yes and no's of what it may or may not be true, but I can react to it and I can see, yeah, it makes sense, or they're stretching. Before we get there, please like, subscribe, hook me up. If you're on Twitch, hey, find me, Willie P Streams. We can play some games. Let's do this. All right.
A single red buzzer squawks loudly, and immediately there's a flurry of activity from the assembled flight and ground crews. At a civilian airport somewhere in Oklahoma, men rush to a line of 7 waiting B-52 Stratofortresses. Ground crew personnel pull the blocks holding the big plane's wheels in place and do last-minute mechanical checks. The jets have been ready for short-notice takeoff for 2 days already, as the world hung on the brink of full-scale nuclear war. Now, somebody's gone and pushed the Earth over the edge. Inside the B-52, flight crews make ready to fly. The radar navigator and electronic warfare officer perform last-minute checks on their equipment. The electronic warfare suite especially will be critical in the coming hours, and will be the giant bomber aircraft's sole defense against enemy surface-to-air missiles. At the cockpit, the pilot and co-pilot fire up the engines and run over their last-minute checklists. The navigator breaks open the classified documents detailing the different nuclear attack missions the aircraft might be called upon to undertake. The men won't know which mission to fly until they're past their positive control points, the last chance to recall the big bombers. The giant planes are carrying over 70,000 pounds of nuclear weapons in the form of pylon-mounted nuclear-tipped cruise missiles in the wings, as well as cruise missiles.
All right, let's get something straight though. They're not always flying with nukes. That's not happening until someone tells them, "Hey, load a nuke." They do have your traditional weapons or your stupid bombs, and then they have the smart missiles and the smart bombs. So let's not just think all they do is nukes.
Missiles in the bomb bays, which they share with 8 large gravity bombs. One by one, the planes edge up to the runway, almost nose to tail in the tight space of the small civilian airport. Normally, the B-52s would operate from a military base, but with the threat of nuclear war, the Air Force scattered its most important aircraft across hundreds of smaller civilian airfields. Any enemy wishing to knock out the U.S.'s airborne nuclear fleet would have to launch hundreds of simultaneous strikes at once, well beyond the capability of any of America's enemies. With the assistance of JATO units, small rockets that help speed the big planes into the air, the B-52s begin their ascent, leaving clouds of billowing black smoke belching out from behind their massive, powerful engines. Each plane carries aloft enough nuclear firepower to decimate a small country, and there's dozens of them taking to the air from airfields all over the United States and in bases overseas. OPLAN 8010-12 dictates the U.S.'s response in a nuclear confrontation, and each B-52 lumbering into the sky is one small part of an overall strategy involving thousands of moving parts. Deep under the waters of the Pacific and Atlantic, emergency war orders are flashed out to the ballistic missile submarines of the United States as
Join large-scale battles with military vehicles. The online action game War Thunder has received a major update.
silent service. Theirs will be the first to strike in what will become humanity's third and possibly last world war. From 50 meters under the waves, the hatches on a dozen launch tubes holding nuclear-tipped Trident ballistic missiles are popped open by hydraulics. The sound is unmistakable. The Chinese submariners, desperately searching for the stealthy American subs, scramble to locate and neutralize these nuclear strike platforms. In seconds, though, it'll be too late, and killing any American sub they do locate will be a meaningless gesture, as a rush of air forces each Trident missile out of its housing and into the water. Chinese sonar operators clearly hear the telltale firing of Trident rocket motors, and in moments, ballistic missiles are lifting up out of the water and screaming high into the sky. The first wave of attacks undertaken by subs closest to the Chinese shores target air defense networks and military airfields. The goal is to knock out as much of the Chinese anti-air capability as possible, allowing the Air Force's airborne nuclear force to do its job. Anti-ballistic missile defenses activate across the Chinese coastline, and hundreds of interceptors are fired to try to knock out the nuclear-tipped missiles. but there's little warning time. And to make matters worse, each Trident is equipped with multiple warheads, which are released just before the missile re-enters the atmosphere. Packed with penetration aids like clouds of chaff and radar reflectors, the vast majority of Chinese interceptors are completely ineffective, and in moments, nuclear fire rains down on Chinese military installations. The next wave of Trident attacks is aimed at Chinese infrastructure, wiping out major airports, industrial centers, and government sites. One strike destroys the Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydroelectric dam in the world, and releases trillions of gallons of water all at once. The resulting inland tsunami devastates communities downstream and kills almost as many people as a nuclear attack.
All right, if you think that's what America's actually going to do, you are crazy. We're not going to try to kill civilians. And matter of fact, we don't want to use nukes. If we use nukes, everybody else will use nukes, and then there's no world. So I'm not a fan of how they're doing this, but I understand what they're going for. I understand the reaction they're trying to get. They're trying to scare people. It's not how it works.
U.S. Air Force B-2s, the stealthiest aircraft in the world, are already penetrating Chinese airspace. Normally the B-2s are hard to spot, but with much of the Chinese air defense network destroyed by American ballistic missile submarines, stopping them now is nearly impossible. Yet stealth is not a complete guarantee of safety. The B-2s fly a pre-planned route through various air defense zones, making course corrections as they navigate, so as to always present their stealthiest side to incoming radar. This makes them very difficult to pinpoint, but the Chinese are well aware that B-2s are in the air and are scrambling dozens of interceptors. Most of the B-2s make it to their targets, but with so much air defense radar in the air and on the ground, all looking for the stealth bombers, 5 of them are discovered and shot down. Those that survive pop open their bomb bay doors and fire off nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. The B-2's targets are more dangerous, and only the stealthy planes can reach them. Their job is to eliminate Chinese military installations in central and western China, requiring them to penetrate deep into hostile territory. The nuclear cruise missiles the planes fire off allow them to safely attack targets from hundreds of miles away, though the planes each carry gravity bombs as well to be delivered to secondary targets. The B-2 attacks devastate Chinese missile sites deep in the country, but it's mostly too late. The nation has already launched a nuclear counterattack. The initial strikes have eliminated part of the enemy's nuclear capability, even if over 100 missiles have still been successfully fired off toward the American continent. Still, every missile destroyed in its silo or mobile launcher is thousands, perhaps even millions of lives saved. There's no winning nuclear war, but the U.S. Air Force Global Strike Command has one job: make the other guy lose harder. Now it's time to ensure that when the nuclear dust settles, China cannot rebuild or resupply either its nuclear or conventional forces. After a 16-hour flight, American B-52s and B-1 Lancers are at last approaching their targets. The crews have purposefully not been told of the damage caused at home by the Chinese nuclear attacks, and none of them want to ask. Ground-based interceptors along the American Pacific coast attempted to intercept incoming missiles, but with a terrible success rate against practice targets, they're largely ineffective up against the real deal. Nuclear hellfire rains down across American cities and military bases. At least the submarine and B-2 strikes have curtailed the extent of that attack somewhat. Approaching the enemy's coast, though, the pilots of the B-1 Lancers leading the attack descend to barely 1,000 feet above the deck in an attempt to evade surviving Chinese radar. The B-52s will mirror this tactic, but only once they've come closer to their targets. Aerial refueling aircraft from the Air Force's tanker service have topped up each plane, but flying low means more drag and exponentially greater fuel expenditure. The B-1s are fast and somewhat stealthy, but the B-52s are giant targets in the sky for any surviving anti-aircraft artillery or enemy fighters. To create a safe path through hostile airspace, a few modified B-52s fly ahead of the rest of the incoming bombers, creating an electronic screen of digital noise to jam and degrade enemy radar. Hundreds of anti-air missiles are fired, but just like in the skies over Hanoi during the Vietnam War, the B-52s do an impressive job of defeating enemy anti-air systems. A few B-52s are lost, but with dozens of them penetrating deep into Chinese airspace, the losses are largely insignificant. America's land-based ballistic missile force.
Think of how many people are on that jet. It's a big crew. And to say that the loss is insignificant is unacceptable. One loss is unacceptable. One death, unacceptable. Again, I realize what they're trying to say, and the military does have an allowed loss limit per mission where they have expected losses or damage or injuries. But everybody will tell you, even if it's only one, that's too many, too much. And that's going part of that risk management and mission planning. How can I do this without taking any loss?
Forces have long ago done their job, marking the second wave of attacks. Both nations have each other's land-based missile sites targeted by missiles of their own, and both sides know that if they don't launch immediately, they'll never get the chance to, as enemy nuclear strikes attempt to destroy missiles in their silo.
This is Blankos, the free-to-play multiplayer game where you can unlock, earn, and
Every major Chinese city has been hit by at least one, many by 3 or 4 direct strikes. Every major US city has likewise been targeted. The B-1 and B-52 crews find themselves flying over a nuclear wasteland, with major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Chongqing now mostly rubble. The land-based ballistic missile force has laid waste to every city.
Where is the benefit of that? Think about where most of the products that we have in America come from. It doesn't make sense. People are afraid of going to war with China. China creates everything. We go to war with China, what are we going to use to fight them? Because they build the weapons, they build everything. Doesn't make sense.
Single major enemy city, and many of its moderately sized cities as well. Now, Global Strike Command's airborne element is here to ensure that China cannot easily rebuild. The bombers fly to their designated targets across the nation, leveling major industrial centers that have so far evaded attack, as well as important natural resource depots. Strategically important mines are collapsed by direct nuclear strikes, as well as ore refining and raw goods manufacturing hubs. Seaports all across the coast are obliterated, as well as major swaths of China's most important farmlands. Next on the list are food distribution centers, important universities and research complexes, and large stockpiles of both military and civilian goods or equipment. National defense armories and reservist bases for the People's Liberation Army and Air Forces are destroyed with nuclear hellfire, as is every major hydroelectric dam left standing. The destruction of these dams are as devastating as the nuclear strikes themselves, flooding thousands of square miles and washing away entire communities. Lastly, the B-52s move to their final targets, known government shelters. These sites are buried deep underground, and despite being secret, many are known to American planners thanks to intelligence gathered by spies and cyber attacks. The B-52s use deep penetrating munitions to target these sites, flying high and letting loose bombs capable of burrowing deep into the earth before exploding. The resulting shockwave is enough to bury all but the sturdiest of underground shelters, killing thousands who thought themselves safe from attack. Their job done, the American bombers turn and head for airfields in Japan and the Philippines. Most of them won't make it, their fuel supply largely spent, or the airfields they're heading for obliterated by conventional ballistic missile attacks from the People's Liberation Army rocket force. The crews of the bombers all knew that the trip was likely one way anyway, though few of them imagined that doomsday would actually ever come. Now 2 countries lay in utter ruin, though thanks to the massive penetration power of the US Air Force's Global Strike Command, China has suffered a far worse fate than the US. The mission of Global Strike Command was never really to win a nuclear war, but instead to deter one, and failing that, to make sure that America's nuclear enemies were so thoroughly destroyed that they could not hope to match the US's own efforts at rebuilding.
So that's pretty much why we have what we have. It's deterrence. Deterrence is a great thing. It's like you go and you have beef with somebody and you're like, man, he's a big guy. I really don't want to punch that guy because of the size and power that person has. It makes you go, maybe I shouldn't do this. So deterrence is awesome.
The men and aircraft of GSC waged the most complete and total war ever dreamt up by man, eliminating not just the enemy's forces, but the ability itself to support a society capable of threatening the United States ever again. If that even matters in a post-nuclear world, though, is still anybody's guess. For more nuclear...
Ooh. All right. You know what? I'm going to say if I had to rate that video out of 10, probably give it a 3 or a 4. I'm not happy with the propaganda that they're spouting. I understand what they're saying. I understand that it's not something we're actually gonna do. It's all of a what if scenario. But what if scenarios are a waste of time because what if spiders come out of my ears? I don't know. Like we can what if everything, but you're never ever gonna be fully prepared. Yeah, so that's really all I got for that one. Hey, appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, give me a like. Let's do this. Subscribe. Come on. And have a great rest of your day. I hope y'all be good. Bye.